As soon as war broke out between Iran and Israel, two of our experienced journalists, Yoni, Bashan and Mendes, knew that they just had to get there. They had an incredible voyage just making it into Israel. Today they're joining me on our news podcast, The Front, to talk about what it was like getting into a country where the airspace is closed and the sleepless nights and long days they've had ever since. They were just about to join me when they had to rush to the bomb shelter. As soon as they were out, we connected with Yoni and Liam in Tel Aviv. A week ago, you were in our Sydney newsroom rushing to finish your stories before you jumped on a plane. When this war began, we had one reporter already in Israel, Paige Taylor, who spent several nights taking shelter as the missiles rained on Jerusalem. And then there was serious discussions between our editors about getting Paige out and whether it was right to send you guys in, especially as the airspace was closed and it seemed incredibly dangerous. Talk me through the journey to where you are now. How did you get there, starting from when you left Sydney?
We were getting these alerts coming through our phones about Israeli attacks on Iran, and at first we were just thinking, it's probably just nothing, like, do we even pay attention to this? And then as the kind of hours wore on, both Liam and I immediately started talking to each other, because whenever anything happens in Israel, Liam and I start texting. Mm-hmm. You know, is this us going back to Israel? Do we need to start packing bags? So I think Liam had already started packing a bag before I'd even got on the phone to our editors. But once it became clear that this was serious and would have long-term ramifications and potential tectonic shifts occurring in the Middle East, we were getting on a plane and we had a few hours to put everything together. I still had to write part of a column that we were putting out in the business section of the paper, which is always fun. But then from Liam's perspective, we're trying to figure out how long we're even going to be overseas for. We don't know how long this is going to tail out for. And so, then we meet at the airport, right?
Yeah, we met at the airport, and we get to the counter, and the check-in gentleman says to us, if you're traveling to, places like Iran, Iraq, you're not allowed to fly. There was a set of cities that you can't go to. Tel Aviv, turned out, was fine, but our flight had been cancelled, but we could still get on this flight to Dubai. So we thought, okay, that's great, but how are we going to get into Tel Aviv?
And we were just sitting there saying to ourselves, okay, what are the borders with Israel? How are we going to get into this country? The airspace is closed. We're definitely not going to be able to fly in, even though our bags are checked in all the way there. So how are we actually going to fly in? And so it's like, okay, can we get a boat from Cyprus? And so we're Googling that on our phones, and Liam's on his laptop and he's got the Google Maps open and he's zooming in on stuff and it's all very exciting. But we're not getting any closer to how we get in, and we're thinking, okay, Jordanian airspace is closed. Do we wait to go to Jordan and then drive over the border into Israel? It's not going to work. It's going to take too long. We need to get there really fast. And then finally, we sort of debated whether we'd fly to a place called Sharm el-Sheikh, which is in the Sinai in Egypt. The only problem is to get there from Dubai, you have to go through neighbouring Arab countries that aren't especially friendly to all passport holders, and it was going to be a little bit risky. So we thought, look, a little bit high risk. Not sure if we're going to do that one. In the end, we decided to land in Cairo, which is an amazing place. We didn't get to see enough of it. You can actually see the pyramids when you're coming into land. They're gorgeous.
Not if you're on the wrong side of the
Liam was on the wrong side of the plane. I got to see the pyramids. So
I've been in Egypt and never seen a single pyramid. But at one point we were even looking at private jets to try and get in, and I don't know if we would have gone that past
35,000 USD. Amazingly expensive.
But and then we organised a car. We got in the car and we just started driving. It was an 8-hour drive through the Sinai, and we started hitting checkpoints, and we get held up at the first checkpoint that we hit, and it's all quite serious, but also in a weird way, like very relaxed as well.
This is our first checkpoint, just before the Suez Canal, before we go over it, and we've taken our passports, and there's a bit of chatter.
They all seem to be very amused that we can't speak Arabic.
That's right, yeah. Or any of the languages that are from our passports.
Yeah, correct.
We get held up there for about an hour and a half, and they're standing there, and like every guy comes around and they're passing around our passports, and we were not traveling on Australian passports. I was on a Swiss one, Yoni was on a German one. our French and German is not really up to scratch. So thankfully they didn't test us on that. But they're passing through and they're sitting there and like smoking their cigarettes, and it was an incredibly entertaining sort of procedure to watch, and a little bit anxious just to see what would happen. Whether these guys would. They were paying a lot of attention to our camera gear. I don't think they actually believed that we were journalists and that we were traveling to Israel. Yoni, they sort of thought it was quite strange that you also had forgotten your press pass. So you were trying to explain to them what margin call was. They were like, what do you do?
That's the business column that Yoni writes in The Australian.
That's right.
So the thing is, like, they didn't understand what we were doing in Egypt. We were like, we're trying to get to Israel. And they're like, why do you want to go to Israel? It's like, because there's a war on. We need to be there. And they're like, so why are you here? It's like, because our ticket to Ben Gurion got cancelled. It's like, but why are you here? It's like, because we're driving from Cairo. Like, no one does this. No one gets into Israel this way. It's like very unusual. So they'd sort of sit around with like, a fag hanging from their lips and flicking through our passports and just saying, so who do you work for? It's like The Australian. It's owned by News Corp. And they're like, well, what's that? It's like, well... So in the end, I had to like Google my name and be like here. And they the thing that got us over the line. So they saw like my profile on the Australian's website. But then Liam goes, show them the video of us in Israel last year with the Iranian missiles and stuff. Like, oh yeah, great idea. So Liam gets the video up, and he fast forwards to the relevant bit of us with the helmets on and all that. And then the guy looks at it and he's sort of really suspicious. And then he sort of starts enjoying himself. And then he rewinds the video to the start and watches the whole thing from start to finish. And then it seemed like 5 or 6 minutes after that, he was like, all right, passports, go, get out of our sight.
Well, at those kind of checkpoints, normally I think some people might offer to pay a bribe to make things move a bit faster. But of course, we've all done the News Corp, anti-corruption training, so you can't do that.
No, we can't be doing that.
The word baksheesh was constantly in my mind, baksheesh. But no, we didn't do it.
So you crossed at a border crossing called Eilat, which is one of the few ways to get into Israel by land. And then you had to drive north. And of course, all this time you're dealing with our editor's anxieties, right? That you were going to get blasted off the road by a rogue drone or a well-targeted Iranian ballistic missile. Were you feeling nervous yourselves?
I'd never been to Egypt, never been through the Sinai. You read through the Smart Traveller website, it says, like, do not travel here. That was probably the uncertainty of, going through this very unknown area, there's occasional kidnappings and things like that going on there. That was a little bit, unnerving. We did take the safest route through that part of the country. And then, but in terms of like drones and missiles, the IDF sort of gives you enough notice when these things are coming through, and we're able to get a bit of an advance notice. And then thankfully that didn't really happen whilst we were traveling from Eilat to Tel Aviv.
It felt like, for me anyway, the bigger risks were road accidents rather than getting hit by an errant drone. Driving at night in those locations is pretty hard. It's not very well lit. We were dog tired. I mean, we'd left Sydney. We lost count of the hours. The whole thing's a blur. We hadn't slept enough. We hadn't eaten enough. We were surviving and subsisting on like service station food, which, if anyone who knows me, like, that's just not enough. But that seemed to be the highest risk factor, not necessarily drones or missiles. Besides, when you're in that kind of environment, you sort of block all that out and you're just thinking, I need to get to where I need to go and how do I get there fastest?
We were running on, adrenaline essentially. Oh my God. Okay. Second one.
Good thing we didn't go back to sleep, huh?
Second one in half an hour.
That's great.
Veuillez quitter votre chambre et vous rendre immédiatement à l'escalier.
So now you're in Tel Aviv, you're staying in a hotel, and one of the things you have to do during the day, of course, is go out and do reporting. But at night, you try to get some sleep. But I've said to Yoni, it's a bit like having a newborn by the sounds of things. You're getting woken up every 2 hours to rush downstairs to a shelter. You must still be absolutely exhausted. Tell me what it's like to be woken up like that, this kind of broken sleep that you and the whole country are going through.
I have total empathy with expecting parents and parents of newborns now, because I finally understand what it means to survive on 1 to 2 hours sleep a night. Because that's basically what we're getting here. Like, I think both Liam and I have learned that if you want to get enough sleep, first of all, you're never going to get it. You'll probably get maximum 4 hours sleep a night. So just get used to that real fast. But if you want to get any sleep at all, go to sleep at about 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the evening if you can. Sleep until the first alarm, which tends to be around midnight. And then very rudely sometimes, like it'll come half an hour later, maybe an hour later, sometimes at 4 a.m. I think the most alarms we've had in one night is 3. And that makes for a really crappy day the following day, especially when, you know, you're facing the usual pressures that any correspondent would face. Like you're trying to find stories, you're trying to write stories. I tend to find I'm at my most crankiest when I'm out of sleep and I'm trying to write something, and sentences, as you'll know, Claire, because I often call you in a panic going, what do I do? But sentences that I know how to formulate in my brain just physically won't leave my fingertips and get onto the screen in front of me. Or if they do, they're a garble, so I need to rub them out and do them all again. And in doing so, in rubbing out what you've done and then trying to do it again, you work yourself even harder and then you make yourself more tired. And so what I've learned is just stop doing everything and go to sleep.
So Liam, we've got some amazing vision of you and Yoni. You wake up and then what happens?
Essentially, the sky is just lighting up, and there's the Iron Dome and other interception missiles are coming up and essentially trying to track down these ballistic missiles that have come over from Iran. And you hear these explosions going off, and then one suddenly it gets through and it lands about 2 kilometers south of where we're staying, and you hear this huge eruption, and the sort of then there's a follow-up eruption, and before that, you know, you see the flames, because it takes a couple of seconds for the sound to come through, and you sort of, and then there's this huge, waft of, it smells like gunpowder, and there's car alarms going off, and we went and visited that impact site yesterday.
So I think one of the craziest things is, like, we will set up our cameras on the balcony. We've become very match fit at dealing with the sirens. We know exactly what to do now. But the first night we did it, we heard the sirens, kind of got up, and I very, amateurly said to Liam, yeah, we've got 20 minutes, don't worry about it. We can set up our cameras, I'll make a coffee, whatever. But we set up the cameras, and then suddenly the Iron Dome swings into action, and up go these brilliant flares from the rockets, and we hear the incoming whoosh of the ballistic missiles from Iran, and we're recording, and we don't know whether to run or whether to say, and there's a lot of kind of situational panic going on. In the end, we just keep watching, and then a missile lands, and it looks like it's about a couple of kilometers away. We hear the sound and the blast wave of it a few seconds afterwards, because there's always a delay. But when Liam and I went back there yesterday, just to take a look at what was going on, I mean, the place was decimated. You saw all of this.
You could tell exactly where that ballistic missile had landed, and then every single building surrounding it had sort of the front of it had been blown out. It was remarkable to see the damage that had happened there.
I think what I wasn't expecting was just how much damage is caused by either the missile itself or just a very large fragment of it that lands at velocity. It doesn't just hit the building. It'll completely wipe out the buildings around it, but then the blast wave will just shatter all timber, all glass. It will break non-reinforced concrete off every building in a 200-meter radius. And that causes the shutdown of a particular part of the city. That's economically damaging, notwithstanding everything else that's causing economic damage around here, like all the shops are closed, there's no one around, you can't gather in places with more than 30 people, etc.
Before this war started, it was unheard of, these ballistic missiles getting into Tel Aviv, but now it's happened on repeated occasions. This war's been going for 7 days now, and there's been multiple impacts, and I think that is what people here are finding so unreal.
When it's daylight, you're out and about reporting, but still some missile attacks are occurring, and so you've got to kind of take shelter wherever you are, whether that's under an overpass or if there's nothing like that nearby. Presumably, you just got to lie down on the side of the road. Do you have a preference? Would you rather be in the hotel bomb shelter or under an overpass on a freeway in broad daylight?
Personally, I'd rather be under the underpass in broad daylight with a large field around me, because you see the scale of what's available for where the missile can land. Whereas for some reason you feel very contained and sheltered in a good way when you're in the basement of a hotel or elsewhere. But you also feel like there's something kind of solipsistic happening in that moment. A bit like when you get on a plane, you're like, this is the one that's going to crash because I'm on it. So you feel like I'm in the shelter, this is the one that's going to get hit. Whereas when you're in a field, you're like, there's no way it's going to hit me. It's going to hit that tree, it's going to hit that thing over there. Also, when you're cramped in a shelter, what they call here a miklat, when you're cramped here in one of these things, you're surrounded by other people and you kind of absorb their panic and their anxiety. Whereas when you're in a field, there's a bit more space, you can breathe. There's something slightly more relaxing about it. I don't know.
And you can see when you're in the field, some of these missiles come through. When you're in the shelter, you don't know what's happening outside. There's like hardly any phone reception. Sometimes an alert will come through, and a little bit of information will come through, or like half a video will load, of an impact. But at the end of the day, you don't really know what's going on until you've left and you've gotten a bit of Wi-Fi reception. When you're in there, you essentially don't know what's happening unless you hear an explosion or a thud, and even then you don't know where what that is hit, where that's hit. Whereas when you're out in the field, you can see everything around you. You can see the missiles being intercepted, as we saw 2 days ago.
You also, if I can just quickly add, there's like different characters to the shelters. So for example, whenever there's a siren in this particular hotel, we go to the shelter, but we get everyone who's been hanging out on the beach. So all these surfers will come in, dripping wet, and their boardies, and like there'll be dog walkers coming in. We went into the shelter last night, and like this beautiful husky turned up, so that like kind of lifted everyone's spirits for a minute. That was nice. And then other dogs sort of come in, they all have to play nice, and you don't really feel like you're in a shelter. Whereas at night, at 4 a.m, everyone kind of like, trudges to the elevator bleary-eyed in their 90s, and we go down to the shelter and look at each other like, not this again. And
people are arguing with their families and things like that. It's like, you kind of get to know these people, and you're like, oh, hey, it's you again. Hey, how you going? Oh, good to see you. And then, we were laughing at this one guy who'd sort of had an argument with his wife and daughter, and they were trying to figure out how they were going to get down, and then one person didn't want to get in the lift, and then we just, you just kind of look at each other and have a bit of a laugh.
It's a level of intimacy no one wants, basically.
Well, we're thinking about you all the time. Take care, guys.